Good morning on this Sunday, April 19th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Governor Brian Kemp promises more testing for coronavirus across the state after expressing frustrations. 1 in 10 Georgians, that's how many have filed for unemployment. And fundraising numbers are in for candidates across the state. We take a look at who's in the lead in Georgia's U.S. Senate races. Theron, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here, keeping a safe distance, joining us from their homes. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp expressed his frustrations this week over the lack of coronavirus tests available in Georgia. Compared to other states, we're not testing yet nearly as many people, and he says he wants that to change.
Our testing numbers in Georgia continue to lag.
This week, Governor Brian Kemp expressed concern over the lack of testing available for coronavirus throughout the state.
As I've said before, the status quo is unacceptable.
Department of Public Health Commissioner Kathleen Toomey says the state is partnering with a new lab that will allow for 2,000 tests a day. She also admits they likely made it hard for people to get tested at the health district facilities because many people needed a physician's referral to be seen.
This is something that clearly has concerned us. I, too, have seen the reports that we're number 45 out of 50 states in terms of our number tested. We know we need to ramp that up and ramp that up quickly.
45th out of 50 states in terms of the number of people tested. Phil, I want to start with you. Have you heard any reasons why we're at the bottom of this list?
Yes, I have, Lori, and the governor has a right to be frustrated. Just to take a step back for a minute, we desperately need far, far more tests. And what's happened is that nationally you had 2 of the major laboratories basically corner the market on testing, and it shut out other labs. Now, thankfully, Governor Kemp, in the case of Georgia, brought in some of the research universities to do testing through their labs, Augusta University, Emory, etc. What we need now is more than just one lab, as Dr. Toomey has said. We need to get vetted private labs all over the state to get involved in testing. I think the bottom line is this. The bottom line is that if you've got employees coming back into the workplace, they have to be tested. And I am glad that Governor Kemp is going to be taking steps soon under the national direction and CDC guidelines to start opening up large sections of Georgia and get the economy going again.
Theron, why do you think this hasn't happened sooner? Why haven't we partnered with more private testing companies earlier?
Well, I think public-private partnerships are just complicated at a time where you're in a crisis because there's so many things that the state government has to go through. But Lori, I would tell you this, back in 2011 and also in 2014, former President Barack Obama warned us about this, and he basically was trying to get more funding for testing and being more prepared for a pandemic in this nation. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get that funding at the time with a Republican-controlled House. But the governor has stated recently that he is using a very strict metrics to really make sure that he understands the numbers that are coming on. He's also sort of inferred that he's sort of concerned about some of the numbers and the format that they're using. But I can tell you this, testing is so important. And I agree with Phil that I think that a lot of the people, when we get back to business, are going to have to actually have some self-responsibility to test their employees as well.
That's a really good point, Theron. And Kathy, besides contracting with private companies, are there other things that the state can do to ramp up the testing?
Well, I think we've got a long way to go. You'll remember that we started out this budget year discussion with the governor recommending a $10 million cut to public health. That is preceded by years of underfunding public health, and we're 50th in the nation in terms of childhood vaccination. So we don't have an infrastructure here to even do the kind of testing if we had the tests and we had the lab capability. So there is an awful lot of infrastructure that needs to be put into place, and I think people have to be very, very vigilant about understanding we aren't opening up Georgia anytime soon. We haven't even hit our peak yet. We're 2 weeks away from that, plus trying to go on the downside. So, we're paying the price for years of neglect to our public health system.
Janelle, let's talk about that, because the governor's current shelter-in-place order, it goes through April 30th. We now know that we may not reach that peak hospital capacity until early May. But, as other states look at opening things up, when do we even start talking about that here? And what does that look like in Georgia?
So I think the time to talk about it is now. We have to keep in mind that every governor is literally building a plane in the sky. This is something that is unprecedented and that you really can't prepare for. But I will say that, kudos to both of our senators, Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue, for being chosen to be on the congressional portion of the task force to reopen the economy. That shows that it pays to have good business people in office. And I think that's where it's going to start. It's going to start with having individuals that are working with our small businesses, as well as talking to our healthcare professionals. Because we have to keep in mind that regardless of where everyone stands, we have to get the economy open, and we have to do it as quickly as possible. So I know safety is number one, but we have got to get this economy open.
I like that analogy of building a plane in the sky. Theron, weigh in on that, because, this is that delicate balance of public health versus the economy.
Yeah, and I agree that safety is first, and the economy has got to be a very, very close second. But one of the things that I've been saying, Lori, is that dead people can't invest, dead people can't buy things. So if we want to really strengthen the economy, we got to make sure we save lives. And I think that this governor understands that. I mean, he's really changed his sort of tone a little bit in the last few weeks, but we've got to make sure that we are, number one, trying to get people healthy that have the virus, also prevent people from getting the virus, but more importantly, to have a measured scale approach as we start back to build the economy.
Phil, we know that Albany has been hit extremely hard. We know there are a lot of cases here in Metro Atlanta. Could it be a case where the governor looks at more restrictions in some places than others, or should this just be uniform across the board?
No, it can't be uniform. We do have to be aware of the hot spots, like in Atlanta or Albany, but we've got to get the economy back going. And if Theron wants to get partisan on us today, we can get partisan too. I mean, Barack Obama had a full Democrat Congress for his first 2 years and did nothing, zero. So he didn't need to go down memory lane with that. But with regard to Georgia, I think that after April 30th, we are going to have to be opening up the economy. We're going to have to be getting small businesses, especially your retail establishments in many parts of the state. Some areas have virtually no cases in Georgia, and so that has to be taken into consideration.
Kathy, weigh in on that, because as much as we hate to think about it, can we think of reopening Georgia without adequate testing?
No, we can't. And we can't say that there are no places without cases, because every county is reporting cases. But more importantly, not every county has the infrastructure to test anybody as it is. And we don't even know how many people have been at home who have been infected, who have been sick, but just haven't even sought out a test. So we are not remotely ready to go. One of the things I'd like to see the governor thinking about, in addition to expanding Medicaid, and thanks Barack Obama for giving us health insurance during that period of time, but I'd like to see the governor explore sort of a Peace Corps, AmeriCorps kind of situation for this year, to train people who have lost their jobs to help do contact tracing as they've been doing out in California. There are lots of people, for example, in the restaurant industry who are used to, listening to people, taking orders and getting information right. And those people might be really good to help start working today to get us trained to do the contact tracing that we're going to need to open up the economy. And I think that it would be a great thing for the governor to explore.
And lots of people out of work. So coming up, Georgia's labor commissioner says we are reaching unprecedented levels of unemployment claims, almost 1 million Georgians, and we'll discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
About 1 in 10 Georgians have filed for unemployment, a staggering number, and lots of folks are calling Fox 5, expressing frustrations over a lack of response from Georgia's Department of Labor. Theron, I want to start with you first. Labor Commissioner Mark Butler put this in some kind of perspective, saying that in the whole year of 2009, the department processed 1 million claims with a staff of 2,000. Well, today the department is processing that number in a month with less than 1,000 staff members. So if your calls are going unanswered, we can kind of understand why.
Well, Lori, I worked at the Labor Department back in 2002 and 2004, and you may remember under the, keep my partisan theme, under Roy Barnes at the time, former Labor Commissioner Michael Thurman was really able to expand the labor career centers all across the state. Unfortunately, under the Deal administration, Mark Butler came in and some of his resources and some of the staff that he had available to him was cut. I mean, he had to sort of cut career centers, he had to cut staffing. What's happening now is that he's trying to ramp up at a time where he just clearly hasn't had the resources and the funding to really operate a labor commissioner office and departments all across the state that will be able to handle the amount of claims they were getting. And then lastly, the only way you count people that are actually with the labor statistics are people who are actively seeking work. And so we know that in this state we've had a lot of people who have been actively been seeking work. Now those people are actually seeking work, and a lot of them have been laid off and they're filing for unemployment.
Phil, Theron's kind of putting some blame on the Governor Deal administration and perhaps the Commissioner Mark Butler. But, really, how does any state keep up? You've got workers in the gig economy now that have different qualifications under federal guidelines. I mean, this is challenging.
It is a challenge, and I don't know if Commissioner Butler was ever a Boy Scout, but the Boy Scout motto is be prepared, but he certainly was not over the last couple of months. Of course, temporarily you can bring in retirees, you can try to ramp up staff, but 2 points. I think one, I don't know why he didn't tell the legislature back in February that, look, something's going to happen with the pandemic and we need to staff up and we need money. And number two, I think it goes to the question of when are we going to get our legislature back in session? We still have 12 days left in the 2020 session. I spoke with the speaker, and I know top leaders in the legislature thinking of maybe trying to do some sort of virtual legislature, but that's a topic for another day. But I do agree that we need more money. We need to staff up. These claims are approaching about 1 million.
Janelle, how do we do that? How do we ramp up in the middle of all of this?
Yeah, again, I think this is another reason why we do have to focus on reopening this economy. When you have, during the 2009 recession, there wasn't a virus and there wasn't social distancing going on. You didn't have to separate everyone 6 feet apart in offices and things of that nature. There's so many different aspects to this that we have to keep in mind and have to consider. I don't think it has anything to do with partisan leadership, because back then with Roy Barnes or Obama, there was no idea that the coronavirus was going to hit in 2020. So all of that wasn't to protect us now. So that's kind of a pointless statement. But when it comes to reopening the economy, I just want to make sure I add this, that sheltering in place, the purpose of sheltering in place is so that we don't overwhelm the healthcare system. It's not because by sheltering in place, it means people are not going to die, that things are not going to happen. Unfortunately, that is going to happen. Even with vaccines, people still die. So understanding the whole picture is, I think, what we have to do right now, and not attack especially our Department of Labor, who is working tirelessly to get people their money.
Theron, do you want to respond to Janelle on that point there?
No, I listened, and it wasn't an attack. I actually was really helping Mark Butler. I think Phil Kent would actually agree with me, and it's just facts, Janelle. When Mark Butler became the labor commissioner, the Deal administration did a good job of building this economy. But what they did is that they rolled a lot of the services that the labor commissioner's office was doing under different departments within the state. And so it wasn't a criticism of the Deal administration or Mark Butler. I'm telling you that this man did not have the necessary resources at his disposal to be able to amp up so quickly at a time when, you're right, none of us knew that we were going to be dealing with this COVID-19 crisis. And so the bottom line is that this show, we're all agreeing on one thing, and that is, let's get him the resources he needs. Most of it comes from the federal government. 80% of his budget at the time, I think, came from the federal government. So let's get him the resources he needs to put these Georgians back to work.
Kathy, I want to switch gears to Georgia's primary, because this week the state elections board voted to allow voters to put their absentee ballots in drop boxes across the state rather than having to mail them in. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I think if we would step back and think about how this year is going to go, I think it's a foregone conclusion that we're going to be having this same discussion in November. So I feel like the Secretary of State has really got to, you know, look at how are we going to administer elections across the state all year long. I think a couple things need to happen. One, I think the Secretary of State's office needs to assume responsibility for the elections. I think we have to do vote by mail and have postage paid reply so that everybody can vote and can vote easily. I think having the ballot boxes is a good idea so that returns can be made not in person. I think we need to make sure that everybody has equal access to those ballot boxes and not just counties who can afford them, because this is an unfunded mandate for counties to be able to put these boxes out there and staff them. So again, I think the state legislature needs to look at how are we going to fund this and really think about elections from now to the end of this year. This year is too important to do this by piecemeal. And but hoping that counties are going to get it right one by one is just not a very good solution.
Phil, speaking of counties, Gwinnett County announced this week that they may actually have to reduce early voting because of a lack of poll workers, and some early polling locations don't have space to allow for social distancing. And I'm sure Gwinnett County is not the only one dealing with this issue. So what's to be done here, even come June?
Well, Gwinnett County did have to reduce the early voting times because they just simply didn't have the poll workers, and because of the shelter in place, and a lot of the poll workers, of course, are elderly. But secondly, I want to push back a little bit on Kathy. Number one, we do start to do the testing and reopening, and it goes right along with our voting process. We've got to keep going because we got to keep our democracy going along with our economy. So basically, let's do the testing. I think now that we have June 9th as our primary, this will be a great laboratory to experiment how everything goes. But the power resides in all 159 counties in their Board of Elections. And the Secretary of State, by law, can only do so much, but they can be a huge assistant. And so let's see how it goes. And one last point, if you can believe the Atlanta paper I read the other day, where the Postal Service said you don't need to put a postage stamp on your absentee ballot request when you mail it in. It'll be honored.
You get the last word. Thanks, Phil. Well, coming up, what do the fundraising totals say about viability in Georgia's 2 U.S. Senate races? We'll talk about the numbers next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The latest fundraising totals for candidates are in what we call Senate race number 2. Kelly Loeffler and Republican challenger Doug Collins both collected about $1.1 million. But one of the Democrats in the race, Reverend Raphael Warnock, surpassed both of them with a $1.5 million haul. Theron and then Phil, what does this say about this race?
Well, you got to give a lot of credit to the Warnock campaign. I mean, for him to outraise everyone that's in the Senate to race right now is really, really big. I mean, he's a first-time candidate. I'm waiting to really look at the numbers. I think that he raised a lot of money locally, but also maybe nationally. So again, to be a first-time statewide candidate to raise $1.5 million at a time when we know that it's very, very difficult for anyone to raise money is very, very strong. The key now is going to be, how does he spend it? And I think that's the one thing that Phil and I agree on, is that you have this money on hand. How do you spend it strategically? Because you still got Senator Loeffler, who's already indicated that she's definitely going to put a lot of money into her race. And I think you got to see what Doug Collins is going to be able to do now, because he was expected to raise a little bit more than what he raised, but he's been sort of on the offense a little bit lately. So we'll wait to see the next quarter.
Phil, weigh in on that.
Well, yes, the Democrat Warnock did do a good job since January of raising that money, but What we need to remember is Kelly Loeffler, the incumbent, has $5 million banked away already, and as Theron points out, she can put in a lot more. And Doug Collins has about over $2 million cash on hand. So the Republicans are in very good shape, and I will agree that now it's the priorities and how you spend it wisely. I think television, of course, is going to be critical, but also the grassroots operations. And so fundraising is tough right now, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level. So it's tricky for both parties and all candidates.
Janelle, let's talk about Senate race, what we call Senate race number 1. Incumbent Senator David Perdue has a huge campaign war chest, $9 million. But Democrats are linking him to Senator Loeffler's issues concerning her stock trades. And since you support Senator Loeffler, what do you think about this Democratic strategy?
Oh, of course they are. You know, and I've been saying this for a long time, that the whole attack on just wealth and being able to fund your own campaign is what we're going to see happening from the left. And here's the reason why. For most of this election cycle, we have been in the House. So that means there's no door knocking, there's no rallies, there's no going to county parties and things of that nature. Those are all things that don't cost much. The things that are going to really win elections going forward, it's going to be these ads. It's going to be phone dialing. It's going to be, social media, attacking the airways, and all of that costs money. So, of course, the left has to take on the two candidates that are able to fund themselves. Because when you have the ability to fund your own campaign, that means that neither the RNC or the DNC has to draw money from PACs, from other individuals in order to support other campaigns. So that means that now your campaign can be self-efficient. And that's what we need to look at. And I want to make sure I say that as well, going back to Warnock, and keep in mind that, Congressman Collins, $250,000 of the money from that $840,000 that totaled $1.1 million, $250,000 of that came from his war chest. So only $840,000 was raised from Collins as it relates to this last quarter. So that he puts him really behind in comparison to the $1.1 million that came from Senator Loeffler and the $1.5 from Warnock. This is all about money. It's going to come down to the dollars.
Kathy, I want to get your opinion on this because this week Democratic state rep and former DeKalb County CEO Vernon Jones made quite an announcement saying he is supporting President Donald Trump for president, and so many high-profile Democrats were quick to lash out at his announcement.
Well, I think it's the kiss of death for him. I think his primary opponent, thank goodness he has one, got an enormous boost. She probably got a big boost in grassroots fundraising this past week. I think people will, on the Democratic side in the primary, are going to put everything they can into defeating him. It's inexcusable. He had to go ahead and switch parties and make it official. But, he's not a team player. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. And I wouldn't want to be the one in his team counting votes come June.
All right, we're going to wrap it there because coming up, we'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Today, we will start with Janelle. We've got about 3 minutes, folks. So, Janelle, we'll start with you.
Okay, awesome. So my winners this week is Senator Loeffler and Senator Perdue. They were both picked to join the task force to reopen the economy by President Trump. I think that's a good pick, especially coming out of Georgia, to have both of our senators. I also want to reiterate the website, securethevotegA.com. If you go to securethevotegA.com, you can register to be a poll worker. So I want to encourage all the young people to do that. And lastly, my losers this week are Stacey Abrams and Elizabeth Warren, who have went on these press tours to try to get the former president, Vice President Joe Biden, sorry about that, to try to get him to pick them as their VP. I just think it's pretty despicable and kind of low down, to be honest, and not becoming. So they're my losers this week.
Theron, we'll go to you.
Well, my first winner is going to be Ryan Cameron. As many of you know, he underwent emergency surgery this week. He's a legendary Atlanta DJ, and I just want to encourage all our viewers to lift him up in your prayers. He's recovering. We want to make sure he gets back to work soon. And then, of course, my loser is going to be State Representative Vernon Jones, but I will have a message to Democrats. Let's pay very close attention to what State Representative Jones said, is that we need to quadruple down on our message from the Democrats on black voters, particularly black men voters. And so I'm not going to waste any more time talking about what he said. I'm going to warn all Democrats that we need to make sure that we focus our efforts on black male voters to continue to make sure that they vote Democrat.
All right, thoughts and prayers are definitely with Ryan Cameron. Phil, we've got about a minute and a half.
Okay, well, I'll make my winner State Senator Brandon Beach. He is filing an economic rebound act to start the conversation on trying to help small businesses, retail owners, restaurant owners get back. I totally disagree with Kathy. You can't continue to hunker down and cower in your homes. In a lot of these counties, we've seen a few cases, handful of cases where they're not in the hospitals, but people are sheltering in their homes if they've tested positive. And again, if there's hot spots, yes, that is a huge problem and we don't want deaths. But I think a simple tax credit of $3,500 to give a restaurant owner for a new hire is great. And my loser is Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard, again slapped with 12 ethics violations for non-disclosures. I said last week he needs to be investigated by the state attorney general.
Kathy, I'm sorry, you've got about 20 seconds because Phil took up a lot of time, so we'll start with you first next week, but go ahead.
All right, I'm going to start with my most important one, and that's all the mask makers out there. If you've been sitting at home sewing and making masks for healthcare workers and for friends and family, you know who you are. The silent masks are really big, and I appreciate your help.
That's great, Kathy. Thank you. And if you could send one my way, that would be great because I don't sew.
Okay, I got one for you.
Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us. We wish you all the best. Thank you to the doctors and nurses also on the front lines, also teachers and coaches who are keeping in touch with our students. We appreciate it. We will see you again next week.